Hello and welcome to Successful Not Satisfied. Here is the podcast where we interview executives, CEOs, and business owners, much like you, who are trying to figure out how to make it all work, make it go, and dealing with the daily challenges that most businesses face. Here you're going to learn about what they're doing to overcome those challenges, and hopefully you'll get some ideas to help your own company. So check it out, Successful Not Satisfied. Enjoy the episode. All right, welcome to Successful Not Satisfied. Today I have Britt Gottschalk, and she is the founder and CEO of Revise Consulting. Britt, thanks for coming on board.
Great to be here, Dan. Thanks for having me.
So we got connected, I think, through a mutual colleague on LinkedIn. And as it turns out, I think she's in Virginia even. So she connected me back to somebody here in good old Madison, Wisconsin. And I want to learn a little bit more about what you do. So tell me a little bit more about Revise Consulting.
Yeah. And, just for the record, it's always nice to meet another Madisonite. And so, when I was talking to her, she was just like, well, let me connect you with Dan. So Revise Consulting, basically what we do is, we implement sustainable virtual workforces, and we're your team of virtual experts that gets work done, period. That's typically the umbrella that we go with. So we're business consultants, and we focus on remote work dynamics. So anything from virtual business partnering in the fields of change management, process improvement, kind of your standard gambit of typical consulting services in the business field, all the way to learning and development workshops, learning more about virtual work, what that means for the future of work. And also, we do sourcing and recruiting for virtual and hybrid talent, because that's a completely different skill set that a lot of employers look for. So we're all over the virtual space.
And we're going to get to talk a little bit about that. But as I like to keep it focused on this business, I want to talk to the business owners about their wins, their challenges, and how they've either overcome or adapted to the working environment. And what you brought up is, I think, very important right now, because of course, many of us have been working remotely for the better part of the last, 16 months. And people, I think, are still trying to figure out how to do this thing. It was all kind of forced on us at the last minute when the pandemic hit, or when it came full force in March. And I guess what I've seen is there's a lot of people that want to kind of keep that remote work environment. But you help with that. In turn, you also have employees. So how has it affected your own business for either finding people or attracting in talent?
So my relationship with virtual work starts well before the pandemic, for the record. It really was something that I came across in my graduate school studies. So just a little bit about me. I do have a background in psychology. And I also have dual master's degrees in business administration and industrial organizational psychology, which is the study of workplace or group behaviors. So it was something that, I was studying in undergrad, learned a little bit about virtual work, and just didn't understand why, because I'm very much like thinking of people and process and how we can be the most efficient as possible. Didn't understand why more professional services or employers in professional services didn't offer that kind of work. So, or it was, very rare, or in between companies. And a lot of the data that we were seeing initially was, very few and far between. And so I really it kind of just took off for me. I really, jumped into it head first when this pandemic hit. And so I was like, oh, this is great. I can turn my passion project potentially into a company. And so as we progressed through 2019, it was something that I ended up pulling the trigger on. And so I started the company, found that there were a lot of people that wanted to stay remote, that wanted to learn more about okay, well, how can we work the most efficiently in this space? Because as you said yourself, a lot of companies are trying to figure out how they can continue to do that. And that requires different skill sets, different focuses on not just problem solving methods, but how to remain emotionally well and how to stay, connected when we're physically separated. So there's a lot of different areas there that that we focus on. But in terms of finding people that wanted to work with me, well, first of all, they had to get along with me, right? Like I'm definitely somebody who, I'm somebody who's like idea a minute, like we're going.
Right.
And so I have a pretty good core team of people that have worked remotely in the past. They typically do have the same kinds of backgrounds that I do with having an MBA or, having a specialty in organizational development or IO psychology or something like that. So we also do internal research. So we're constantly figuring out ways to improve our team dynamic internally, as well as providing that information to our clients.
So what's the best process to go about finding employees if you need them or you want them? Because from my own experience, what I've learned is that companies tend to look for people when they need them. And when they need them, of course, they're never available. And this is especially true for small to medium-sized business owners. I constantly harp on them. You need to be advertising for opportunities basically year round. You can't just wait until you have that need, because it's going to take anywhere from 2 to 3 months to fill that spot, assuming that you're looking for the right individual and not just looking for a warm body to fill. What's been your experience?
Well, with us, we're pretty unique in this way where we've had a lot of people, we've had a lot of talent come to us. I think, we're
want to stay remote. That's why.
Yeah, exactly. But that's something that is so telling. Like, when we meet with potential clients, we meet with employers, we're saying, look, all we had to do is offer a flexible work option. And then everybody's applying for positions that, we've had internally. And as of right now, we're constantly growing our team, constantly looking for talent. But when we first started putting out the feelers, not just on LinkedIn, but like on Indeed, and then through a couple of different personal applicant tracking systems that we use with our recruiting service, it really was people were applying for positions that they weren't even qualified for because they just wanted to stay remote. We've had people reach out to us and say, hey, you know what, like I'm a quick learner. Do you have a position for me? And I'm just like, you got to have 10 years of consulting in your background. Sorry, the waitressing didn't really equate to that. But sometimes, we'll see people and they'll be like, I'm leaving my job because I don't want to go back to the office. My employer is making me go back. And realistically, having that pool of talent is something that I know is very rare. So my biggest recommendation for organizations moving forward, you don't have to make going back to the office mandatory, but you have to make remote work, flexible work an option for people that are coming into your organization to attract and retain that talent. Once people have gotten a bite of this apple, they're not just all of a sudden going to forget what this was like for them. For a lot of people, Definitely. This was a very big awakening in terms of like, okay, where you can get work done and how you can be more productive in that space. So I would say my best recommendation is to always have that rolling talent pool, always be collecting that talent, always be having those conversations. Every single time you go to a networking event or you're talking to a colleague or a friend in the professional space, ask like, hey, so have you been seeing any really good talent lately? Like, have you been making any good colleagues out here that might have this skill set that could fill this role that we might potentially need in the future? Or do you know just good people, right? So
I would give you a virtual high five right now, because you're basically saying everything I'm saying to people. Now, whether they listen or not, that's a whole different story. What are you hearing from either clients or other business owners as to why they feel the need to bring people back full time? And we obviously, we're both from the Madison area, so we've seen very similar companies, and we've seen some very large predominant companies in the Madison area that say, hey, you're coming back as of July 20th, and we're bringing the full staff back. And I'm not going to throw out any names, but you pretty much know who I'm talking about there. What is their reasoning for wanting to bring everyone back, do you think?
Well, I think the big reason is the C word, change. Mm-hmm. Change is terrifying. People do not know how to navigate that typically when something is thrown at them. And this is very much a situation that none of us has lived through before. We're living through it now. And so hopefully we're at this tail end of it. But people typically want to gravitate towards what they know. And what employers know right now is that, we know how to work in the office. That's something that's comfortable. That's something that's safe. I'm used to that. I can see my employees. That's the metric that I've been going on to see if they're getting work done, but that's not necessarily a metric that's viable going into the future. It's something that employers should be seeing, that based on where people are working, it doesn't matter. What does matter are the expectations and the quality and consistency of work that's getting done. We have this opportunity to change the way that we are viewing how work gets done. So it really does come back to this feeling of safety. I know some people in managerial leadership roles might feel a tendency to micromanage. Because when you don't know how to do something the right way, you become afraid of that becoming an autonomous process. If you don't know what people are doing, you don't know how to measure the outputs. How could you be okay with people working from anywhere, right? So
Yep.
but I would say that that's a reevaluation of what the priorities are within an organization. And I think for a lot of companies, they're going to have to reevaluate what those core values really mean to them and what it means to their employees. Because ultimately, an organization is only as strong as its employees, and it's only as good as the kind of talent that they hire.
And you hit on a couple key points here that I also talk to a lot of companies about. I disagree with you that companies know how to work in the office. I don't believe they do. At least it's never been my experience that they do. I think that, to your point, that's what they're comfortable with. And they always equate that butts and seats equals productivity.
Yep.
And you pretty much said that. It's just because somebody's in the office doesn't mean they're going to be productive. And a lot of what I've been talking with clients about recently is part of the fear of letting employees work virtually is you have not figured out how to measure an employee's productivity yet. So they're either working all the time because, again, of the expectations and kind of back to that micromanaging point, they don't know when to shut off the clock and you haven't given them any instruction on how to do so. At the same point, you don't know when an employee has reached what's considered a legitimate kind of finishing time either for the day or for the week with the work that they get done. Right. Now, how do you, because most of your employees are virtual, actually all of them are virtual, aren't they?
Yep.
Okay, so how do you come across a process to make sure that they're actually productive so that because obviously you're paying them a wage, and let's face it, it's business. So I pay you something, I expect a value in return, and that's why companies hire us. At the same point, if you're hiring an employee, you're going to say, well, you're going to get X salary, but I need X amount of workflow completed on a daily or weekly basis. So how do you actually track that?
So what we do, first of all, I do want to go back to the point of, butts and seats, hours in a place altogether does not mean that work is getting done. So if you're taking that metric and you're trying to go and do the same thing virtually, we're working 80-hour weeks in the office, we're working 80-hour weeks at home. That's not realistic, right. Because realistically, it's like people have other things that they are doing that might require their attention. They have other work that they have to be doing, whether they have, kids at home or not, or if they're taking care of elderly parents, whatever it might be. The whole reason that this work model works is because these natural distractions that we have at home are things that are keeping us from being too sucked into just our work and not delivering on that productivity. We need those breaks. And in the office, it's so easy to just get sucked into sitting down and working for 12 hours a day or 10 hours a day or whatever it might be. And I know that I'm a recovering workaholic. So
you and me both. And so now something I've also heard though, and I can't remember the article I read, but there was initial boost in productivity because people weren't traveling. So you got that initial time that you were spending in the car. And then it kind of, as you pointed out, you've got the kids, you've got the dog, you've got the spouse or significant other in the household. And while it provides a lot of breaks in the day, it now stretches that day to the point where now we might be starting at 6 o'clock in the morning, but now we're not getting it done till 10 o'clock at night because, again, we don't know when to turn that off. I apologize for interrupting you there, but I think that's an important point that, and that's where I think a lot of these companies are missing it, that, that person answering the email at 2 o'clock in the morning. And yes, I have heard from companies where they have employees that are doing that. And I did a poll, I think about probably a month ago, where a number of people had commented that they don't know when work begins or ends. And Yeah.
And I was going to say that goes right into, going with expectations in terms of like, how do we measure what we get done? And so as you're saying, that workday stretches from 6 to 10 o'clock at night. But the difference is you're working from home, you're treating portions of your time like tasks that need to get done rather than one monotonous day that flows together. So coming back to how we measure productivity with our employees, we don't meet more than twice a week as a full group. There's no need to. I know a lot of employers have been doing this, these all day Zoom meetings, but realistically, it's like when there's nothing to distract you and you have a set list of tasks that need to get done, we have an estimated amount of hours of work that need to go into a project. If there's some kind of impediment, that's communicated back to the team. But realistically, what are we doing at the beginning of the week? Show us your tasks. How many hours is that going to take? Great. Update us at the end of the week. And everybody pretty much goes and does their work. So it's very easy to see if somebody's not doing what they have to get done, because realistically, it's like, okay, well, if this project takes, 5 hours out of your week to do, there's no expectation around you not completing it, because you ultimately can determine your work schedule. And so if you're treating that 5-hour task as like, okay, I chip away an hour of it every day, that's fine, or if you want to be somebody that chips away all 5 hours in one day, that's fine as well, as long as that work is getting done. Now, if we don't have that estimated amount of time to do that work, and I'm not saying that there aren't impediments that come in that extend the timeline, but typically it's like, our work schedule is very predictable. Even though we are a consulting firm, we're able to schedule when the client contract is going to start, when we're going to finish it. And, we can get that down and within a margin of error to understand like, okay, how busy is everybody going to be? What is your bandwidth each week? We all have visibility into one another's calendars. We know when somebody's going to be online, we communicate that within our status messages. We do use the Microsoft Teams suite. And so it's something that we're very effective in the way that we communicate. And if there's anything that is going to happen or that's going to affect a project deadline, that's communicated to one another very, very quickly. So
what I'm hearing you say is get to understand the basics of project management, understand timelines, expectations for what amount of work needs to be done over what time. And probably the other key point that needs to be clarified here, which everyone should know and probably expects, is clear communication. If you're falling behind, why are you falling behind? What do you need help with? What's getting in your way? Again, what are you expected to do in what amount of time during the week? So it really just seems like a few basic changes would make a tremendous difference on productivity working away from home or away from the office.
But the hard part is changing behaviors that most of us have engaged in for decades, right? So it's
I see that with Zoom meetings, right? I think you said the all day long Zoom meetings. Well, I don't see all day long ones, but I see 8 Zoom meetings in a row, and none of that's productive.
Well, I mean, and it really does come back down to understand what the expectations are of your employees right now, what they think they are. You need that feedback. Really carve out what those expectations should be going forward based on what the employee needs and what the employer needs, and come to a middle ground there. And then you're going to have to let the birds leave the nest for the most part. Just because you're constantly on a Zoom meeting, just because you're constantly looking over somebody's shoulder to make sure they're getting work done, doesn't make them do it any faster. And that doesn't matter if you're in the office or at home. And so if that's the way that work has been getting done in the past, then you have to ask yourself, was work really getting done?
Are you feeling like a prisoner in your own business? And what I mean by that is you spent all your time growing this company and you've gotten it to a point where it should be functioning on its own, but you still find yourself doing more than you should. You're getting way more in the details and you're getting stuck working on things that you have the staff and the team to actually solve for you. If you're finding that you're stuck here and that you can't find a way out, you can't seem to grow your top line sales or your bottom line revenue, please feel free to reach out. Check out danpaulsonletsgo.com. That's danpaulsonletsgo.com to learn a little bit more about me and my company and what I can do to help you out. You can always reach out to me there and schedule a meeting. There's no obligation, no cost, and I might be able to provide you with some solutions that can help you get out of your own way. I think that's a very good question. And I do see a lot of micromanagers out there for that very fear that you're talking about. Now, I'm assuming that you've probably had some employees or some coworkers that maybe weren't meeting deadlines or expectations. Coaching at a virtual level is a little bit different than walking over to somebody's desk or pulling them into the office and sitting down and talking with them. What are some ways you've kind of helped people get back on track when you realize that maybe they weren't getting as much done as they could or they should?
So we have a pretty, and I'll go through all the steps here, the whole process, but we have a pretty rigorous onboarding process because we do understand that everybody, based on what level of interaction you've had with technology in your experiences, either in the office or at home, are different. So we want to make sure that we're getting a good baseline when you come on board. So based on that, we're able to see like, okay, well, we might have to adjust based on where somebody's ability to use Dropbox papers at. We might have to modify some of the training sessions that we have to make sure that we're helping them out with those skill sets and helping them develop those. We also do a lot of team building exercises with the app suites that we use to see from a leadership standpoint who's having trouble doing what, and then reevaluating that. And typically I have one-on-ones with my team each week, with members of my team each week, and then talking about what we're seeing, how their skill sets are developing, or if they feel like they're having any trouble. We stay really transparent with it. It is something that, because we do these I don't want to call them workshops, but they're these like little mini team building exercises that we'll do during the week to understand more about like where your skill set's at and if we can help as a team to get you to where you need to be. So for example, something we'd like to do at least twice a month is a Dropbox paper collaboration session. So Dropbox paper is something that we've been using as a team since we've started the company. And it's a really comprehensive tool to be able to just, add and move information around very quickly, and sharing media files, like all of that kind of stuff. If you haven't checked out Dropbox paper, I would highly recommend it. It's a cool tool. And so that's something that we use to collaborate as a team. And what we'll do is like, we'll go into the session, there will be prompts that we have to answer or different tasks that we have to do within that app that we can see how long it takes for people to complete them. And we won't be on a video call. It'll be completely through a screen, and we'll have to communicate via the chat. We'll have to communicate, via the IM. And so we're able to see just in that session how well people are collaborating with one another and how well they're able to use the tools. And so when I'm saying we, I'm talking about us at the leadership level.
Sure.
But we do that with a couple of different apps just to see where people's functionality is at. So that's something that I think is pretty unique to what we do internally.
And that's a great suggestion too, because I think a lot of people, they buy into technology thinking it's going to make life easier, but they don't understand fully how the technology works. Or maybe there's just a few people that do, and then they never test it with anybody else to see if people actually understand what steps need to be followed. I see that happen time and time again. So again, that goes back into process and making sure that you put good processes in place and continually check back up to make sure they're following, because we all get a little sloppy. We all like to take shortcuts every now and again.
Yeah. And I mean, you realistically, it comes back to, what are your employees saying? They're going to tell you what they need, whether they're going to say it to you or show you through their work. And you're going to have to see, like, as an employer, as a team lead, what can I be providing for them to get to the place that they need to be, so we can all collaborate better, so we can all work together better, not be frustrated. So yeah.
So what do you see as, we'll kind of shift gears a little bit now. So what do you see as what companies really need to change in order to start attracting in good talent? Because the problem that I'm seeing out there is there's more positions right now than what there is skill sets available for, which means you're going to be taking business or not taking business, but you're going to be taking talent from somewhere else. In many cases, maybe that talent is somewhat comfortable where they're at. And obviously you help out with staffing and issues like that. What do you see as the biggest change that many of these companies have to make if they're going to start filling their team with good quality candidates?
Well, first and foremost, you're going to have to dust off those job descriptions, because I'm sure a lot of them are still, are still from pre-pandemic, or what you were looking for in terms of qualifications with an applicant before this pandemic hit. And we're at a point now where the skill sets that employers are looking for, that employees are going to need, are changing, not just from the hard side of being able to use this technology, being able to problem solve in this environment, but also from a soft skills side, being able to have that awareness around how to support your employees from an organizational standpoint as a team lead, how to communicate with one another, what kinds of signals you should be looking for in terms of, are people feeling uncomfortable? Do they feel like they're kind of lost when we're working together as a team? Do we have a common problem solving method? A lot of those skill sets are things that I think were glossed over before, because we took for granted that we were all in the office, so we could see how everybody was acting and what they were doing all the time. But the proof really is in the pudding, and it does come back to, okay, based on the quality of work, based on the way that we're talking to one another, based on our camaraderie, what are we noticing the gaps are? And so for an employer, I would say you really do have to flesh out what those expectations are going to be from your employees, and not rely on the whole butts and seats approach. And, I feel like you've probably been saying that for a long time, but now it really does come back to, if you don't modify those expectations, then of course remote work isn't going to work for your team, because you're not going to understand how they can be most productive in that space. And that can be very frustrating and hard to meet deadlines and deliver. So.
Yep, definitely. And that kind of leads to the second part of that job description, which really technically isn't in the description, but how do you actually sell the position? So many people leave out workplace culture, values, how we work together. That information to me is very important, because in the end, if you're just selling the job becomes a commoditized thing. Okay, I know these are the tasks I'm going to have to do, but what are going to make doing these tasks for you different than the company I'm working for example? If I see same, and I'm happy where I'm at, it's going to be very hard to get me to move no matter what. What are some ways that you recommend as, for companies kind of sell that opportunity to come work for them?
You have to become, in order to adapt to what your employees out here are going to want, you have to offer the opportunity for them to work where they're most efficient. And that might be at home, that might be in the office, that might be at a coffee shop in Morocco, wherever that might be. But you have to be able to offer, like, hey, our culture is very much centered around what you're producing in terms of quality and consistent work. And then also, what do you bring to the table as an individual? I mean, when we're talking about work where you're most efficient, we're stripping away the numberism of coming into the office, sitting down, doing your work, and then clocking out for the day. We're saying, okay, we're seeing you as a person. You have certain tasks that you need to get done on this team, and that's the value that you add. It's not just, okay, so I have 13 out of 15 people here today. Those 2 other people I'm going to have a talk with because they're not in the office. So right. I think more organizations are going to have to come back to looking again at those core values and saying, like, okay, well, are we taking this more micromanagement approach because we don't know how to manage employees in this space? Or are we going to learn how to be most effective for our employees and then ultimately turn that into a competitive advantage?
Yep. Now, do you see, when it comes to employees, there's always that concern about attrition, turnover. What are you seeing for longevity, or what should companies really start to expect? And are you seeing any changes since there are companies that are doing more virtual work? Are we seeing opportunities for maybe where employees are going to stick around longer than they had in the past?
Well, so before I even go into that, I do want to say that I've always been a proponent of, don't be afraid of employees leaving, because I do think that is something that is fairly natural. You should also be aware of, like, okay, the exit process, what does that look like? Are we getting the right kind of feedback to make sure that this doesn't happen in the future? Or how can we prevent people from leaving? Or how can we get them to be their best selves here and help them, grow professionally? But there's also attrition that, you just can't help. For the most part, somebody wants a different opportunity, but that shouldn't mean that you're not going to deliver on those kinds of quality skill sets. You're not going to embrace employee purpose and understand how that ties into your organization, and really foster their growth of their career. So just wanted to put that out there first. The other thing that I will say is that because you offer flexible work options based on what your organization does, there's probably a lot more leeway for people to grow in the professional development space. So that career ambition can increase, knowing that it's like, okay, well, I don't have to move to Indiana for this promotion that might happen. I can stay here and still get that and continue to be with this company that cares about my values and what I do outside of work. They care about my work-life balance, right? And so I will say that offering flexible options will most likely decrease attrition based on the types of opportunities that are going to be presented to people all over organizations. So that's my 2 cents on that.
Are people taking more time to invest in employees again? I know, especially after the last recession in 2008, one thing I experienced is they kind of shut off the valve for employee training. They were looking at the number of years the employee would be with the company, and there tended to be this at least this belief that, well, in order for that person to get to where they want to go, they're probably going to have to hop to the next company and so on, which is why you see resumes that should have at one time been maybe 1 page long now start spread into 2, maybe even 3 pages. Are we getting back to where we're starting to invest that money into those employees again?
Well, I think that organizations have a decision to make. I don't need to tell you, you could turn on the news, you could, whatever outlet that you watch, CNBC, Fox, MSNBC, whatever it might be. And you can see that we are very clearly in the middle of a renaissance. We're very clearly in the middle of a workplace revolution where we have employees that are, calling crap on employers that are like, you know what, I need you to come back to the office. They're like, well, I've been doing fine. Why do I have to come back to the office? And this is going to be a critical moment that will either, and I hate to say it, but it will either make or break employers, because employees are going to find positions. They're going to work for companies that are ultimately caring about them as people. And as we continue to see more and more millennials and Gen Z enter the workplace, we're learning that purpose is greater than a paycheck. And so that's not an incentive that really works anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And so as we continue to go forward, I think employers are really going to have a hard talk with themselves and say, okay, well, we can either adapt and listen to our employees, because there's a lot more of them and they know what they would like to have and they want to have flexible options, and we can offer that. Or we can continue to draw this line in the sand, and you can see how that might affect your attrition rates, your turnover rates, and not only that, but how that affects your clients long term. So I want to say that the employers that are willing to do what they need to do to grow and adapt and survive are going to listen to the employees. The ones that aren't, they're probably not going to make it.
Well, and here's an issue that I think a lot of companies are facing. Again, back to the traditional work environment. You come into the office, we see you, we interact. I don't think companies have figured out how to create a culture when the culture isn't in their bricks and mortar building. What are some techniques that you're aware of that can help kind of create a cultural through a virtual workspace?
Well, first and foremost, you have to have the awareness. And I can't emphasize enough how important it is to really assess not just your employees, but also, leadership. What do they want? And figuring out how can we incorporate this into the culture that we want to grow into. And there will be a transition point. Another thing that I will say is that if you're really talking about giving organizational support at each level, because that kind of buy-in is required to instill a culture that's going to be sustainable, you have to have employees that are at all ends of the spectrum working where you believe they can be most efficient, which means if you're going to have that working where you're most efficient type of model, okay, well, some leadership is going to have to be working from home. Some leadership will probably have to be working from the office. Some leadership will probably have to be hybrid. And you should really disperse that within your model so that there's no type of in-group, out-group. There's no type of, unconscious biases that start to happen, because what we like to do as humans is we like to go back to feeling what's comfortable. So it's really easy to just say, okay, everybody can work from anywhere, but all the leadership is still in the office. Well, then you're going to start to have that inadvertent pressure for people to want to come into the office, because they're like, well, I don't want to get passed over. All of my managers are in the office. I don't know how I'm going to grow and develop here at this company, because, if I'm not in the office, I'm not being seen. So everything kind of just ties back into really practicing what you preach. And I'm not saying that it's going to be an overnight fix, but you really do have to make sure that that culture is interdispersed within each level of your company, because you can have core values, but if it's at the top level and you can think they're great and it's amazing, but realistically, what's the behavior that's happening on the front line? That's your culture. So you have to.
And are you living your core values?
Exactly.
I mean, there's a lot of companies that have core values that I talk to the CEO. I'm like, what's your core values? They're over here. I can look them up. Well, then you're not doing this every day. This is not part of who you are. It's just fancy words that some consultant came in and made you create.
Yep.
I think back to your point, a lot of companies have to go back and review their culture and review their values and make sure they're in line. And then they really have to start coaching to them. And that's something, again, I've always seen an issue with. But so
if there was ever a time, if there was ever a time to change, it's like, okay, it's pretty much now. It's pretty big deal what's happened the last 16 months. So you might want to take a look at what you're going and which trajectory you're on, and versus where you want to be in the next year. So
I think there's tremendous opportunity for no matter what type of business you are, if you tackle this now, instead of waiting or assuming that, over time, we'll just go back to the way it was. Because I really don't see that happening. The technology's been here for the last decade, but over the last year, it's really developed into what I think a lot of businesses need and could use. And if we're just going to try and wait it out and make sure that things go back to the way they were, we're probably going to be disappointed. This is a huge opportunity for you to really get good talent in if you're willing to change.
Yep. Absolutely. And I mean, it's natural to change. I mean, I always like to talk about when email came around, right? Where it's just like, okay, nobody was going to use this. Nobody's going to use the internet. Nobody's going to use the World Wide Web. And now it's our lifeline, right?
Yes.
It's like we got through the email. We're going to get through this. I promise.
We could get rid of a few of those emails, though. I think that went too far.
Yeah. Some of those are just,
Yeah. Anyway, as we start wrapping things up here, one of the things I like to ask my guests is, so if you were meeting with a business owner, new, old, whoever, what's the one thing you could share with them that you believe would most help them grow their business, become more successful?
Well, first and foremost, I will say, you know what, if you have an idea, if you have something that you're passionate about, you're not afraid to, do the hard work to make it happen. Absolutely take the chance and go for it. It's not going to be easy, but it's going to be worth it. If you're somebody who really does have that drive to change things and you do feel passionate about something, don't let anybody dissuade you from that, because the harder you work, the more connections that you build, it's going to come through in your success. And so I like to say that the only difference between a good day and a great day is momentum. So you continue to keep moving forward. You continue to keep working hard to make your dream happen. Nobody can take that away from you. So, okay. And the other thing that I was going to say is that, as a young entrepreneur, you are going to have to trust people. And I know that that's probably really scary, but I think a lot of people, especially in my generation, will say like, oh, well, I did this on my own. I got here because of all this hard work that I did. But realistically, it's like, Rome wasn't built by one person. There wasn't just one person, leading the charge. There's never just one person behind anything. And all of those connections that you make are going to help you grow as a person professionally. It's going to prevent you from making mistakes that you might have not seen because somebody that you have a connection with has been there before, and they're going to end up helping to mentor you through any of those very difficult obstacles that you will face, because there will be days that you're going to be like, I don't know if this is worth it, but that community that you build is really going to help you through.
And I've had many of those days myself. I can completely understand where you're coming from. Well, Britt, thanks again for taking the time to meet with me. I really appreciate it. And I believe our guests are going to get a lot out of what you have to say. You shared a lot of good gold nuggets in there that are always important for people, even if they heard it before, to hear it again and remember that, you do need to take care of some of these issues, especially if you're going to want to hire new employees over the next decade or better. Thanks again for everything. And I really appreciate you joining me. As always, love the conversation.
Thank you so much for having me, Dan. And thanks to the listeners for listening.
All right. Thanks a lot.
Thanks again for checking out Successful Not Satisfied. Hopefully there's something you learned and you're able to take away and use in your own company. Check out our next episode in the coming weeks. And also, I would like to take a moment to thank our sponsor, KGI Design Group. They have been instrumental in helping put these podcasts and many other things together for us. They do a lot of my graphics and my branding. And if you need help with that, I urge you to contact them. KGIDesignGroup.com. Thanks again.